Yes. Okay. So, very briefly about my story. It's interesting how every cultural astronomer needs to explain their story. So, I did my PhD in astrophysics on planetary nebulae in 2014, and had a bit of an existential crisis at the time. Happened to go to a conference in Mexico, in Chichen Itza and Tulum at the time, and that completely blew my mind. And I decided I wanted to work in cultural astronomy. I volunteered with Dwayne and Bob for 4 years until I was very kindly invited to work at Western Sydney University as a cultural astronomer by Bob and by Ray. So thank you, Ray. I'm very grateful that you considered me dean of collaborating with you on this topic. And it has been quite a journey. It's a 7-year transition to go from astronomer to cultural astronomy. So it is certainly my aspiration to make cultural astronomy more accessible, especially as part of a curriculum. All right, so what does it mean to talk about Aboriginal astronomy when you're not Aboriginal yourself? How do we do non-Aboriginal Aboriginal astronomy? Well, it starts with collaboration. In Australia, it starts back in the days with this astronomer called William Dawes, who you may have heard of before, who was the first lead astronomer, and he had really good relationship with the Aboriginal people, the Gadigal people in Sydney at the time, captured everyday language, and also had a friendship story, some say a love story, with a Gadigal woman called Padagorang, and he made a lot of notes about the language with Padagorang, and that's how a lot of the language in Sydney has survived. He also, he opposed a punitive expedition against Aboriginal people in 1791, and so he was not allowed to stay any longer in Australia, and he had to leave. This is a picture of his little hut here, where people say it was a bit of a hub, where a lot of Aboriginal people and European love to hang out and chill and discuss. So today, these collaborations continue. These are some of the Aboriginal astronomy projects that exist and that have been carried out in the past 20 years, basically since pioneered by Ray. So you can see that there's quite a lot of projects that have happened. And also, wow, this map is mostly empty, right? So there's so much potential for building more successful collaborations. What do these collaborations look like? There's living cultural knowledge, so that goes through the revitalization of the star stories and star knowledge, and the dissemination through art. If the culture is not living anymore, then we have written records and historical records from the pioneers, or traditional records that was recorded at the time in the past. And for example, Bob has a beautiful example here of dating a story by the Gandangara, sorry, not Dharug, Gandangara people, and Palawa stories that were dated back to 12,000 years old. And if none of that is there, then we can still look into the archaeology and the archaeological record and try to find information in there. For example, looking into a study of stone arrangements and alignments for cardinal points that was led by Ray and Dwayne. Or if you're curious about archaeoastronomy, you can read Clive Ruggles' handbook. It's only about 2,000 pages or so, and Clive's speaking right after me in this talk. Okay, there's a few places missing in this map. For example, we don't have the Yolngu people here at the top, and the Walpuri people that are communities that Ray has been working extensively with. So this map definitely needs to be updated to reflect the full accuracy and potency of Aboriginal and European or Australian European collaborations. And if you want a broader scope of what's been done in Aboriginal astronomy over the past 20 years or so, then I definitely invite you to read Ray's review called the Dawes Review, Australian Aboriginal Astronomy and Navigation. Again, here the Dawes refers to William Dawes. All right, in that context, let's talk a bit about what's happening in the Blue Mountains. So there's been Aboriginal occupation in the Blue Mountains for about 22,000 years. This is the Three Sisters here at Echo Point, very famous touristic sites and local sites. And so in the Blue Mountains, there are two cultural groups that are still living. We have the Dharug people there and the Gandangara people there. So are these cultures still alive? Yes, they are. This is Dharug elder here Auntie Jacinta Tobin. This is Jacinta and I giving a talk a few months ago about Dharug astronomy to school teachers. And there was a conference especially dedicated to the retransmission of Aboriginal knowledge to teachers so they can transmit it correctly to children. And Auntie Jacinta is doing her PhD on songlines. So songlines we mentioned earlier today are these traditional routes that traverse Australia across thousands of kilometers. They are named songlines because the path was remembered as a mnemonic through a song, and a song describes the landscapes, but also all the cultural practices and stories associated with the path itself. And one of the longest songlines in Australia is called the Seven Sisters songline, which starts in Western Australia and ends up in the Blue Mountains. And does it pass here? Of course. We had this morning the beautiful introduction by Onwari, and we have accounts of this beautiful story, or not beautiful story, but this story all across Australia. And as it turns out, just this week, Auntie Jacinta has raised quite a bit of money to have ladies, 7 ladies from Mutijou, just from here, around Uluru, to go back to the Blue Mountains and relearn the story. So there is an exchange of knowledge while we're here in Uluru to get the knowledge. Those ladies are back in the Blue Mountains and they are re-teaching the Seven Sisters story as it's been saved in Uluru back to the Blue Mountains where the knowledge was lost or heavily impacted by colonization. This site is called the Three Sisters. There may or may not be a link between the Three Sisters and the Seven Sisters. So this is currently being investigated by various Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal groups around the country. And so there is this interesting word that I learned only a few months ago about relearning. For a lot of Aboriginal groups, the knowledge has been heavily damaged by colonization and genocide, the systematic extermination of people and their culture. And consequently, there may also have been an abandonment of the culture because the system was not there to sustain the transmission of the knowledge. Then the culture may have been abandoned. The knowledge that remains is very fragmented across people, across locations, and it can be reinvigorated by visiting sacred sites and having people discussing together, typically referred as a yarn. Here is our very own Pete at the back there, pointing to the rainbow serpent in the Hawkesbury Bend. And this is just to say that I will not share the location of the places that I'm presenting today because there's a risk of revealing then those places to the public, and these cultural heritage then suffers sometimes damage due to graffiti and vandalization. And also I have not had permission to share these locations as of today. So the place that I'd like to talk to you about, I have named Cairns Ridge, doesn't really have a name per se. One of the Dharug names that we've come together with our collaborator Lee Button is, who's a linguist, a Dharug linguist, is Biladuru Wal Kalung Bulga. Biraduru is the sunset, Wal means the magnificent or the majesty, Kalung is the side, and Bulga is the mountain. So we're talking about the mountain where the sun sets magnificently on the side, which is another name you could give for Solstice Mountain in Dharug. And so after spending quite a lot of weekends in the bush, exploring about 100 to 200 rock platforms, one day I came across this site. So this is an incredible site and place to be in. Feels like being on top of the world. And your attention would be immediately caught by these rock cairns that we can see. It's a little bit hard to see the rock cairns just from this photo, so they're better seen from satellite imagery. So here you can see that we have 3 rock cairns aligned on the blue line, and then another 2 rock cairns aligned on the second blue line, facing also what I call the sandstone face. And so these alignments are in pretty good agreement with the direction of the solstice at the setting sun in summer and in winter. So this was an absolute awe when I found this. This is coming onto summer solstice. The last ray of sunlight hits that little pinnacle there on the site. And so there's interesting game of lights that are happening at this place. This is what the sunset looks like in winter. So I've been coming there for several years just to be able to see the solstices at different times. And we can see interesting alignment with 3 rock cairns and the sun. All right. As Bob mentioned earlier, it's possible to do photogrammetry and 3D models of these places. It allows people to visit the places remotely and also to analyze the site without having the need to be there. You can head to my Sketchfab page if you'd like to see some of these 3D models. There is also a video that I wanted to show here that will not have the time to show, but you can basically put these 3D models into a video game environment, and then you can basically travel in a first-person environment virtually onto the sites. Okay, sorry, that's what it looks like. There's a video there. So, okay, this looks like it's aligned. Is it aligned though? Well, before we can attest that there's a discovery of a solstice site, which is fairly exclusive. There's been only 1 to date, as far as I know, in Australia of stone arrangements facing the solstice, unless I'm wrong. Ray, feel free to correct me. We need to prove that these rock cairns are indeed of Aboriginal origin, and we need to prove that there's indeed an alignment that is more significant than if it were at random. So these are some of the statistical and cultural tests that we are carrying out today. Is it possible to date these stone arrangements? Basically, it's very hard. And this site is interesting because of the many occurrences of other features as well, cultural archaeological features that are around. Typically, we've got some stones here that resemble very much stone tools and the fragments of flakes and cores from stone tools industry, which is where the men would be doing their activities while the women would be in the valleys finding food with the children. Dating these stone tools is hard as well. The reason why I call this place Cairns Ridge in the first place is because there's many cairns other than the cairns supposedly aligned with the solstices just in various area, which is pretty interesting. And we have first-hand accounts of rock cairns and stone arrangements used for the marking of dreaming tracks and song lines and traditional paths in the Blue Mountains in an article. So this supports the idea that these little piles of rocks could be of Aboriginal origin. If they could be cultural, topographical, or astronomical markers. And finally, you can come across pretty nearby. You can come across this hill over there, which you see that erected stone. If you walk all the way up, then you find this little interesting sort of geometric shape. And if you come across on the other side, you can see that taking a shortcut, it looks like this stone could have been lifted to give that specific inclination there. So all this needs to be tested. But what is so compelling? Oh, okay. And this one is just to make Ray absolutely cringe. Here there's a cave with some symbols that we've come across. You can see some of the emu prints that are on the towards my side here, or maybe kangaroo prints, and 9 little dots. These 9 little dots could be a natural feature, or they could be an engraving. But as per Ray's suggestion, when I said that this could be the 7 sisters, he said, let's grab an image of the actual Pleiades and see how much they overlap. And so then you can put them together, do a very nice Photoshop, and see how much they overlap. And that seems to be a pretty good fit over there. So should you publish that right away? Probably not. Ray is asking, Dimitri, have you done your graph analysis? And it's true that I have not. And so I must wait. And Clive, who's going to speak right after me, says, Dimitri, what's your selection bias? And it's true that I have not taken that into account either. But as I said, it's the many occurrences of interesting cultural features in the area that are very interesting and marking in this area. Every little circle that are here is a sign of occupation, whether it's purely occupational, like grinding grooves for tool making, or it can be animal footprints, something that's more symbolical or ritual. We also have Dharug elements that are not archaeological. The Dharug culture lives on. So there's a few words related to astronomy. We've got the sky is Bula, the sun is Guwing, the moon is Yanada, Birung is the stars, and the Milky Way is Warawa, which is the same wall as Biradruwal. The emu in the sky is Mariong. And finally, there's also links with the moon. For example, I was told that I was a full moon person. I mean, I'm at that age now that in the cycle of my life, I am a full moon person. There's an awesome story about Miami, which I can tell you later privately. There's lots of still of research that still needs to be done on this, but it's absolutely very exciting. It takes a lot of time to do this research. There is a lot to be uncovered everywhere you walk in Australia. There's stuff to be found. And in the spirit of reconciliation, reparation, and revitalization, this is what leads us to do this research. If you'd like to support Aboriginal culture, but you don't really know how, even as an astronomer, who's not a cultural astronomer, this is a QR code you can scan. And just before we go, I would like to thank you, Ray. I've got the correct words here. So I would like to thank you for being an inspiring mentor. I would like to thank you for always being available for meaningful conversations, even the difficult ones and also the good ones. I would like to thank you for elevating careers and opening doors to young and not so young people. And I would like to thank you for saying what you have to say always, and to do that with kindness and care. So thank you, Ray, for opening the bridge to cultural astronomy to me. And thank you, everybody.